Perceiving things through sensory experiences is all great and all, but have you ever tried to use logical methodology in combination with empiricism? If not, then today's your lucky day. In 1920s, people in the Vienna and Berlin circle were trying to find out what was the best way to reshape the society in which science and pure mathematics could play a greater role. But you could say it was not a united doctrine, as people who led this movement at different stages had different views, as they could not decide which central idea held logical empiricism together. But instead, they all agreed that the hard sciences were the only things that made them hard. To provide some substance, it is better to look at how logical empiricism came to be. Logical empiricism is like a trail mix of ideas brought forward by a different view of philosophy. Just pick and choose whatever you feel like eating. From the language side of things, Ludwig Wittgenstein saw this philosophy as the critique of language, where one can distinguish between a logical discourse and a retarded one. This approach to thinking is discussed in his book, Treatise on Logic and Philosophy, where correspondence theory of truth states that falsity of a statement can be established via how accurately it represents the reality. For example, if your bank statements tell that you are in debt, and the bank has informed that you have officially lost the ownership over your house, then you are definitely in debt. While from logician side of things, Gottlob Frege tried to condense maths into pure logic, and this tradition was carried on by Bertrand Russell, who quickly got bored but still wrote about in his book Principle of Maths, which ended up inspiring logical empiricists. These ideas included Russell's type theory, which assists in helping to avoid paradoxes, thus creating more coherent logical pathing. The last part of the trail mix was the empiricism, which was heavily dominated by the Hegelian metaphysics. Although this empiricist root of logical empiricism is not as modern compared to logicism and language roots, but nonetheless still important. F.H. Bradley tried to explain the metaphysical entities which lacked empirical backing, while back in Vienna, Ernst Mach had a major influence, as well as he used mathematical functions to describe the sensation. Jesus, I'm already scared of this man. I can barely use maths to calculate and track my monthly spending, and this man here is feeling shit through maths. Instead of talking about maths, let's move on further. The philosophy divides statements into two types. One is that a statement is an analytic gap, meaning it can be logical truth, which can be verified logically. Or it could be synthetic, meaning it is contingent and empirically verifiable. For example, an analytic state can be that bachelors are single men, and a synthetic statement is that bachelors are unhappy. This above idea originated by Hume's fork, which classified that statements are either ideas or matter of facts. He then aggressively ordered that commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. While Immanuel Kant reacted by challenging this notion by writing a whole book called Critique of Pure Reason. He was like, bro, there's another type of truth, which is a statement that states fact but can be true before experience. He stated that mind can arrange the data to experience space, time and substance. But upon hearing this, the logical empiricist community was like, nah bruh, Hume is right, and have you seen his fork? It is magnificent. Other principal concerns to what the logical empiricists attached cognitive meaningfulness to. The first stance was that anything that is verifiable through experience was cognitively meaningful. This made metaphysics, ontology, and ethics failed such stance, thus made them cognitively meaningless. Geez, that's harsh. However, Moritz Schlick changed the stance by seeing ethics and aesthetic statements not as cognitively meaningless, as cognitive meaningfulness thus not only depends on such criteria, but is widely defined. Ethics and aesthetics were more of subjectively defined, while theology and metaphysics have pseudo-statements which cannot prove wrong or right. Thus the logical empiricist community considered this and concluded that Hume's law cannot really just throw the synthetic statements under the bus. Although they still kept synthetic and analytic statements separated, as each statement was different from the other. As time progressed, the community grew milder, with Carnap publishing his paper in 1937 called Testability and Meaning, where he replaced the verification with a confirmation. He said the universal laws were not verifiable but confirmable, and then he proceeded to show that probability could provide a degree of confirmation but failed to do so, while further mildness was brought to the scene by the principle of weak verification. A strong verification occurs when experience can confirm it, but if an experience can render a statement probable, then such a situation can be stated as a weak verification of the statement. As this philosophy becomes milder and milder, it tends to feel like a confused child trying to pretend like a mature adult, but ends up crying again. Oh, sorry for offending any logical empiricist. Oh wait, there are none anyways. Nazi defeated, Neo-Kantianism removed, Husserlian phenomenology removed. Well, that was the best time for logical empiricists to rise and willingly not to fucking jam the traditional philosophy into a new scientific experiment. Thus they became a respectable member of the philosophy of science. The logical positivists used science as a tool for explanation and envisioned one single science which could explain it all. The most accepted model for scientific explanation was the deductive nomenological model, which was analyzed by Karl Popper in the function of general laws in history, and then again in 1948 with collaboration with Paul Oppenheim under the article Studies in the Logic of Explanation. The DN is made up of two parts. One is the explanandum, which is a sentence that describes a phenomena that requires explanation, while second is the explanans, which are sentences that provide evidence for the phenomena. For the model to be successful, the explanandum requires to follow explanans as a conclusion from the premises or evidence provided in the explanans. Secondly, the premise that is set in the explanans need to contain an essential premise consisting of a law of nature which, if removed, will end up collapsing the explanandum. In easier words, one does not simply write a paper with no evidence. Yes, after using that meme format made me feel 10 years older. Do I sound old? No, I tried. While simultaneously the logical empiricists were trying to create a unified science. All sciences were to be expressed in one common language. In this process, the logical empiricists tried to use theory reduction where phenomena were to be explained in broken down and simple phenomena. This is where the DN model was implemented along with mathematical boundary conditions, ultimately reducing all sciences to fundamental physics. This sounds like an evil villain plot to me where they collect all the infinity stones and put them in infinity gauntlet. But don't worry, Karl Popper is coming to pop their bubble of delusion. Karl Popper was one of the most important critics of logical empiricism. In his book, The Logic of Scientific Discovery, where he wrote about verificationism, he argued that the problem of induction made it impossible for empirical verification to take place. Secondly, he also asserted that affirming the consequent provided us with several logical possibilities for a causation, which potentially leads to a deductive fallacy. Suppose the following argument: my car does not have fuel, thus it will not run, while the second argument is that my car won't run, thus it does not have gas, which is a logical fallacy as there could be several other reasons why my car won't run. Popper's approach to science was to take a hypothesis which could be proven false through using data from an observational test. He said falsifiability of a hypothesis does not make the statement meaningless, but just unscientific. Now all the people who got angry over the fact that metaphysics was called cognitively meaningless, then here is the salvation brought to you by Popper. He defended metaphysics by stating that although metaphysics was unfalsifiable, thus unscientific, but in future with progress in knowledge and technology, metaphysics possibly can become falsifiable. Now for the main course, that is falsificationism, which was Popper's scientific epistemology. This theory shows that you can have infinite numbers of empirical successes, and even then, you cannot verify the scientific theory. Under falsification, science creates evidence for a scientific theory and scientific realism, but this evidence can only take likeliness of the truth, but not the truth itself. Popper denied that all knowledge was scientific, and he advanced critical rationalism, which holds that scientific theories and knowledge should be rationally criticized through testing, which may lead to falsification. This epistemological philosophy sees human knowledge to develop through conjectures and refutations. Thus Popper acknowledged the usefulness of logical empiricism to help human knowledge to progress, but ultimately declared that he had killed positivism. Well, what more do you need than Popper bossing around a philosophy? But sadly, logical empiricism was not just criticized by him, but many others, especially Hilary Putnam, who basically put the final nail in the coffin through his 4 objections. F. Observational terms, F. Classification of unobservable terms, F. Unobservable terms, F. Scientific theory. By the late 1960s, logical empiricism was as dead as a McChicken. As in the 1970s, Freddie Ayer said that the most important defect of logical empiricism was that nearly all of it was false. After the fall of logical empiricism, another debate reopened up, that whether the world that was beyond human understanding could be visualized through scientific theory or not. In simple, whether science can offer us knowledge of metaphysics, and we are still debating that fact and are pretty far from understanding the metaphysics properly. Well, during all this, logical empiricism became the punching bag of philosophical society and got hit so hard that it became irrelevant decades later. I think we are a little too harsh with logical empiricism and logical positivism. I know, they hated metaphysics, but it does not justify the fact that we take its acknowledgement away from it. We need to appreciate that logical empiricism helped analytical philosophy to prosper and brought empiricism back to Britain. Without logical empiricism, other social sciences and psychology would not be where it stands today. So let's say, our thanks to logical empiricism. Haha, psych. Logical empiricism sucks. Also, subscribe to me.
So there will be objective knowledge, not used, not known to anybody. Now, theories are important for our lives.